Good morning, Little Masters, and welcome back to today's Tolkien Times. I'm the Man of the West, also from the Prancing Pony podcast. Let's get started with week 36's Word Nerd Wednesday. Now, as you found out a couple of weeks back, we're going to be spending the rest of this series' Third Age Thursdays enjoying the food and drink at a long-expected party. Now, of course, that means all sorts of new words to look at on Word Nerd Wednesdays, especially names. Now, last week we looked at Hamfast Gamgee, the gaffer himself. This week, we're going to do a little more than just pure word nerdery. We're going to do a little botany as well, as we look at a word that Tolkien had to battle with the proofreaders about. Now, near the end of tomorrow's reading, we're going to come across the following moment. Inside Bag End, Bilbo and Gandalf were sitting at the open window of a small room, looking out west onto the garden. The late afternoon was bright and peaceful. The flowers glowed red and golden, snapdragons and sunflowers and nasturtiums trailing all over the turf walls and peeping in at the round windows. "How bright your garden looks," said Gandalf. "Yes," said Bilbo, "I am very fond indeed of it." "Well, it's those nasturtiums that I want to talk about." Now, frustratingly, when I was working on this episode, my autocorrect wanted to turn those nasturtiums into nasturtiums with an M, rather like Tolkien's proofreader did in The Lord of the Rings. To start this story, let's go to letter number 148, written to Catherine Farrer in August of 1954, just 1 week after The Fellowship of the Ring was first published. Now, Mrs. Farrer was a writer of detective stories. She was married to a theologian by the name of Austin Farrer. He had been the chaplain at Trinity College. Now, Catherine is the recipient of around a dozen of the letters, maybe a little bit more, in the revised and updated edition. He writes to her, "I'm afraid there are still a number of misprints in Volume 1, including the one on page 166, which, by the way, the letter doesn't tell me what that is. But nasturtiums, Tolkien says, is deliberate and represents a final triumph over the high-handed printers. Gerald's appear to have a highly educated pedant as a chief proofreader, and they started correcting my English without reference to me. Elfin for elven, farther for further, try to say for try and say, and so on. I was put to the trouble of proving to him his own ignorance, as well as rebuking his impertinence. So, though I do not much care, I dug my toes in about nasturtiums. I've always said this. It seems to be a natural anglicization that started soon after the Indian crest was naturalized, from Peru, I think, in the 18th century. By the way, he's right, as we'll get to in a bit. But it remains a minority usage. I prefer it because nasturtium is, as it were, bogusly botanical and falsely learned. I consulted the college gardener to this effect. What do you call these things, gardener? I calls them tropaeolum, sir. But when you're just talking to dons, I say nasturtiums, sir. Not nasturtium? No, sir. That's watercress. And that seems to be the fact of botanical nomenclature, Tolkien says. Well, Walter S. Judd and Graham A. Judd in their book Flora of Middle-earth concur. And thankfully, they explain some of the etymology for us. Very handy here on Word Nerd Wednesday. Nasturtium, the most frequently used common name of tropaeolum species, is derived from Latin nasus, nose, and tortus, twisted, a reference to the pungent smell of these plants, which is due to the presence of mustard oils in all their parts. Okay, but then why not call them nasturtiums like the unfortunate proofreader in Tolkien's letter? Well, they explain that it's misleading because the same word, nasturtium, is the scientific name of the watercresses. That's the genus Nasturtium of the Brassicaceae, the mustards, a related family that also contains mustard oils. For this reason, Tolkien used the less commonly applied name nasturtiums with the N for these flowers. They go on, they are sometimes called Indian cresses, a name that was in use by the 17th century. These South American plants, introduced into Europe from Peru, thus the Indian element in their name, were called cresses because they have a flavor very similar to that of European cresses. Now that would be enough, but it's never enough here on Word Nerd Wednesday. I wanted to find out how they got their name tropaeolum. Well, that comes from Latin tropaeum, which means trophy or monument, and that in turn comes from Greek tropeon, which means a monument to an enemy's defeat. And it's derived from trope, meaning to turn, since the Greeks would erect these monuments at the places on the battlefield where the turning point occurred. Sometimes the armor and weapons of the enemy would even be hung there. Well, the name tropaeolum was coined because the round leaves of the plant look like shields, especially with the stem and how it attaches in the center instead of it like, one side, the bottom. And then the flowers, which are often red or at least red blotched, look like blood-stained helmets. Now, the word with the N, the spelling that Tolkien used, nasturtiums, is in the OED and goes back to at least 1740. But it's sure not in use today, as my autocorrect and Google try to tell me. Folks, that is it for today's Word Nerd Wednesday. Come back next time as we wander the wide, wild, wonderful world of words weekly on Wednesdays. And if there's a word you want to know more about, please let me know by emailing barnleman@theprancingponypodcast.com. Please visit patreon.com/Tolkien Times. Learn how you can support the show, get an ad-free feed, and all that good stuff. And then join me again tomorrow on today's Tolkien Times for Third Age Thursday. If you're watching this on YouTube, you know the drill. Like and subscribe. Follow or subscribe in your podcast apps, and everybody please follow @Tolkien Times on social media. Finally, as Faramir says, go with the goodwill of all good men.